we move to the report of the Committee on Chaplains to His Majesty's Forces, and I call on the convener, Scott Burton.
Moderator, before I begin, I wish firstly to pay tribute today to the Venerable Martin Goff, who died 2 weeks ago, aged 57. Martin's funeral is taking place as we speak in Salisbury. Martin was chaplain of the Fleet, the Navy's senior chaplain, from 2018 to 2021. He was very much a friend of this committee and of this church, and his wise counsel was very much valued. He was an outstanding leader, priest, and man of faith. I ask commissioners today to remember his wife Amanda and his 2 teenage children in your prayers. Martin, we see through a glass dimly. You see face to face. Rest in peace. Moderator, it is my privilege to present the report of the Committee on Chaplains to His Majesty's Forces. Our report outlines some of the areas in which our forces and their chaplains have been deployed over the past year, from supporting the NATO response to the war in Ukraine, both overseas and in training Ukrainian personnel here in the United Kingdom, to stepping in at our borders in response to industrial action, to flying the flag for UK interests in the Pacific, in the South Atlantic, in the Middle East, and in Cyprus, to name but a few. What each of these locations and many others have in common is that our chaplains are there with their people, where they are, sharing their highs and lows of service life, while colleagues at home are caring for their families and their loved ones. Your predecessor, moderator, Dr. Greenshields, and I had the opportunity to hear at first hand during his visit to the Army of the Padre's role, the spiritual and pastoral role, but also in the development and delivery of ethical leadership training and the Army's and the service's response to moral trauma. We were humbled, for example, by the work of the Joint Casualty and Compassionate Centre, the JCCC, not only in their historical work to match names to bodies found even today in the battlefields of World War I, but their 24/7 ability to get personnel home when required. Let me give you an example. A sailor who was on a ship in the northern Arabian Gulf. His father was seriously ill here in Scotland. He was flown into Kuwait City by the ship's helicopter, a commercial air flight to London, an RAF flight to Glasgow, and a taxi to the Royal Alexandra Hospital in Paisley. From the family contacting the JCCC, that sailor was at his father's bedside from the Gulf to Paisley in 10 hours. Every chaplain sitting before you today will have their own stories of caring for the spiritual and pastoral care of their people, of simply at times being there. Let me give you a couple of examples from my own experience. I remember being flown to Singapore to join HMS Liverpool following a suicide on board, and being asked by a group of sailors to light a candle and say some prayers in the compartment where their friend had taken her own life. The ship's company were in shock, as was the command. It was a week of listening and caring, a real pastoral privilege, and I'm still in touch with that commanding officer to this very day. And secondly, I was the chaplain in HMS Cardiff in what we now call the Second Gulf War in the Northern Arabian Gulf. We were in action coveralls, we were carrying gas masks and life jackets, wearing anti-flash hoods. There was a threat of a gas attack or maybe more. I put out a box of New Testaments in the junior rates dining hall, and they quickly disappeared. One night, doing the usual pastoral rounds of the ship, I entered the main communications office. Ah, Padre, just the man we need, the expert. How many do you know off by heart? I knew I was being led into a trap. They had started the New Testament at the beginning, why wouldn't you? They were reading Matthew's Gospel, chapter 1. And they were seeing who could memorize the number of names in the genealogy of Jesus. The highs, the lows, and sometimes the ridiculous. The bond between the chaplain and your flock, including the command at every level, is enduring. It is built upon decades of being seen as trustworthy, of being approachable, of being confidential, of being where your people are. In a ship, in a trench, in an armoured personnel carrier, or in an aircraft hangar. Wherever our people are, it is the ministry of Christ's church, and in our name as a church, that our ministers take up that call. With the personal sacrifices that come with any ministry for all of us. As my predecessors have done on many occasions, I would invite any eligible minister to get in touch with myself. Coffee or lunch is on me, or any member of the committee, if you would like to begin to explore what ministry in the forces could mean for you, either full-time, as a regular, or as a reservist. I cannot commend this ministry to you more highly. Moderator, today is an opportunity again to give thanks to those who serve in this very unique community, that in the highs and lows they may know that they are held and upheld in the prayers of the church. Moderator, I am not a commissioner and would invite the principal clerk to move the deliverance.
I so move. Seconded.
Questions for the convener? Seeing none, we move to section 1, receive the report. Thank you. Section 2, section 2? We do, yeah. And online? We've got, before we do that, Chris Kellogg.
Yeah, microphone 41. Moderator Kellogg 62. For the best part of 20 years, I've had the privilege of sitting in these seats and been thanked by the General Assembly for what we do. I want to personally thank you for that thanks. I want to thank those who have supported me through my ministry. Some of them are sitting in the hall today and no doubt online. But I also wanted to pay particular thanks to those who are sitting in the public gallery and in the visitors' gallery, our spouses and our families, who also bear the sacrifice of the service that we are involved in. And I wanted to just make sure that that was something that, for the many years that I've sat here and been thanked for, that that was something that was extended also to them, in particular tribute to those people. I'm glad that in the sea of green and dark blue and light blue that you've chosen to wear green this week. And Earlier we were told, as the convener has already said, that there's no such thing as a free lunch, but not looking at anyone in particular up in the galleries there, but it could be arranged in the castle if you wanted to find out about military chaplaincy. But the opportunity to say thank you on my behalf and on the behalf of my colleagues, but also just to acknowledge the support of spouses, families and friends who support us in our ministries. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't see anyone else wishing to speak on this section, so section 2 again, Assembly and online. Thank you. Section 3 and online. Thank you. Section 4. Thank you. Section 5. Thank you. Section 6, and I believe we have Derek Gunn wishing to speak to this. Thank you.
Moderator, Derek Gunn, 227. I'm a retired minister, but I also serve as Padre of 867 Squadron of the Air Training Corps. It is a wonderful privilege to have those times which are set aside for a Padre's hour. Why they say it's an hour, they maybe think we talk too long, but it really is an hour. But in one session, it almost went to an hour. And if you count the added time later on, during the time when Ukraine was occupying our minds, I was sitting with some of our older cadets, and they talked and they asked the question. The commandment says, "Thou shalt not kill." And we train our armed forces to defend by killing. How do we reconcile these two factors? That led to an intensely deep and, for me, a very moving situation where we thought about what that meant. We thought about defending the vulnerable, the innocent. We talked about things that were fair and unfair in war, to hitting military targets, to avoiding civilian casualties wherever possible. To do that with 16, 17, 18-year-olds is a wonderful privilege to have. And I would encourage any others who are able to do that, and they connect so much. It's wonderful to walk into the squadron. Hiya, Padre. That kind of relationship with teenagers is a wonderful relationship. The young men, young women, because I don't call them boys and girls, they are not. They are young men and young women, some of whom will go into the forces, many others won't. But the ideas of discipline leading to self-discipline, the idea of thinking conscientiously about what warfare means is a very, very valuable thing to do. I urge those who are eligible, as the motion says, I urge those who are eligible to consider giving that kind of service. In giving it, you will receive so much more back. I encourage also the combination of Army, Air Force and Navy, or maybe that's the wrong order, the Navy being the senior service, but forgive me for that one. But I urge them to get together and do something, giving something of these experiences to a recruiting leaflet for chaplains, something that's bright and attractive, and to also simplify the procedures for chaplains coming in to be Padres in the cadet forces. I thank you for listening to me. I thank my fellow chaplains who have made me welcome. In particular, I thank ATC chaplain for Scotland, who's been a lifelong friend. But thank you to all those others who serve with me, and I'm sure they join with me in accepting that it is a wonderful privilege to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. We call on Dr. Greenshields.
Number 61. Is it on? Yeah. I know that very often at a time like this, there are not a lot of questions or comments made. I just wanted to reflect very briefly and thank the convener for the time that we spent together. But to say this to our chaplains, in speaking to generals and brigadiers on our visits, they hold you in the highest regard. They see you as absolutely essential to the well-being of the armed forces. They see you as that hinge that you spoke of earlier on, moderator, between two worlds, and you offer them such incredible support, and they give you such respect back. And I remember speaking to one young major when I was there, and he said, these are the guys that go into conflict with us without a weapon and support us. And I just felt I needed to say something about the way in which you are held by those with whom you work on a daily basis, and the respect with which and the admiration with which they hold you. So well done, guys and girls.
Thank you. Thank you. We move to section 6. Is that approved? Thank you. We have a new section 7 in the name of Alan Steele.
Moderator, 33.
And do you, just checking, do you have a seconder?
The Reverend Dr. Grant Barclay has confirmed, moderator.
Perfect, perfect. And do we need to read it, Principal Clark? Would you like to read it, or will you have the Principal Clark read it?
Very happy for the Principal Clark.
Thank you. Principal Clark.
Here we go again. The new section 7 in the name of Alan Steele is, note the importance of the chaplains and service charities such as SAFA, the Armed Forces Charity, in supporting the pastoral and welfare needs of serving personnel, and encourage the wider church to seek out and support veterans and their families throughout Scotland.
Just do it.
Moderator, thank you. General Assembly, I wish to commend the work of our Armed Forces chaplains and those of our allies. As a veteran RAF legal officer and a lawyer who now represents members of the Armed Forces, I know the importance of pastoral care. In common with a civilian minister, an Armed Forces chaplain works with other agencies for the benefit of those in need. In the Armed Forces, that agency is often SAFA, the Armed Forces Charity. SAFA stands for the Soldiers, Sailors, Airmen and Families Association. It was formed in 1885 as the Soldiers and Sailors Families Association when there was no Royal Air Force. There was no welfare state either. SAFA's role was to alleviate the worst effects of the poverty of families of soldiers and sailors who did not return from foreign campaigns. SAFA still exists to this day to restore independence and dignity for those who were willing to die for us. SAFA work, like that of a minister, is rarely, if ever, glamorous. Society often does not want to know the reality behind the uniforms, behind the medals and the ceremonial drill. When the service person's life crashes around them, it is often SAFA volunteers who quietly go to work to ease the pain and rebuild shattered lives. SAFA does not judge, nor does it turn away from the difficult case. I served in the RAF as a legal officer for almost 17 years. I noted that when the system works, chaplains work hand in glove with SAFA to restore hope and prevent tragedy. But much more needs to be done. The sad reality is that many of our young servicemen and women do not approach the chaplain or SAFA when things start to go wrong. Many have no faith. Many have no faith in God and no faith in a charity. Much more needs to be done to promote early intervention. That requires the work of chaplains and SAFA to be better known and better understood. We must remove the stigma that seeking help is a sign of weakness. That certainly applies in the armed forces, but it also applies in every parish in this nation. In every one of our communities, there are veterans and families of those who gave their lives or who came back broken. Sometimes the brokenness is hidden. Sometimes it starts to appear years later. Sometimes men and women slowly become unrecognizable to their families. We all remember in November, but all too often we tend to forget the effect of sacrifices made and the physical and mental price paid by many service people and their families once they've returned to a civilian life that is alien to them. When I left the RAF in 2020, I thought I would be okay. I was wrong. I was actually disappointed by attitudes and behaviours in my community and my profession. I naively thought that veterans were understood and cared for. Perhaps that is because I had the privilege of serving in the United States of America, where I was thanked daily for my service by civilians. I forgot that what many of us have done for this nation is unknown, and it must remain so. War is horrific. It is ugly. But so too is so-called peace when it is without compassion and understanding. We must also do more to understand the needs of veterans and their families once they return from service life. After I left the RAF following multiple deployments, I personally was exhausted. But I was fortunate, as I knew that my church doors in Giffnock on the south side of Glasgow were always open to me. I took my place in the pew, and I found solace in Scotland when it was most needed. We must work to ensure that veterans and their families know that there is a safe, loving, non-judgmental place for them in our church. SAFA can be a link that gets them there and into other places of worship. Initiatives like Veterans Chaplaincy Scotland are to be commended and encouraged, but it is SAFA that has the network and the local knowledge of where veterans are in every community, which will lend itself to more being helped, suicides being prevented, families remaining together, and perhaps, hopefully, more being brought to faith. Moderator, thank you.
Thank you. Convener, are you willing to accept?
We're willing to accept, Moderator.
Thank you very much. Assembly, are you happy to accept the new Section 7? Wonderful. Thank you. And the deliverance as a whole. Thank you.
Moderator, one of the members of His Grace's party is Admiral Sir Ben Key, the First Sea Lord and Chief of the Naval Staff. I've personally served with the Admiral and know that he is a great supporter of chaplaincy. Moderator, should you choose to invite him, and if it be the will of the General Assembly, I am sure the Admiral would be willing to address us.
Thank you. I would be happy for the Admiral to address us. General Assembly, are you happy for the Admiral to address us? Thank you. Thank you for inviting him.
Please sit down. Moderator. Commissioners, it is a real privilege to be here today to join you for part of your assembly and to have the opportunity to reply. I would just like at the commencement also to recognise the service and life of Martin Goff, who tribute was paid to earlier. Well done, thy good and faithful servant. There were two boys at junior school who, as their education progressed, increasingly fell out, such that by the time they left secondary school, they could barely exchange a civil word between them. One headed into the church and the other into the Royal Navy, thereby each hoping never to see the other again. Many years later, however, they found themselves standing on the same station platform. The bishop, as one now was in full flowing robes. The admiral, as was the other, was dressed not dissimilar to me. The bishop, spotting an opportunity, recognizing his old sparring partner, walked over and said, "Excuse me, station master." "Could you tell me what time the train to Glasgow is?" The admiral spied the trap. "I can, madam, but in your state, should you..." "In your state, should you be travelling?" I am the grandson of an Anglican bishop and the grandson of a Royal Navy captain. I can just about get away with telling that joke. And perhaps that is the only credibility that I have to be here to address you today. There is a prayer said to have been kept on the desk of Admiral Chester Nimitz, one of the great World War II naval leaders. And the line strikes for here. "Keep me from getting talkative, and particularly from the false habit of thinking I must say something on every subject, on every occasion." So I'll endeavour to be relatively brief. But of course, there are 2 points that I would observe on that prayer. One, I very rarely hear anyone, in any sense, offer a quotation saying, "Please make me more verbose and give me longer than anyone would wish to listen." And secondly, what I've also learnt is don't follow Scott Brown, because half the things I was going to say, he has said. That moves us to 2 observations. 1, you're a bit closer coffee. 2, it does show some alignment between what your committee has talked about and concluded about the role of chaplaincy in the armed forces and what I, as one of the chiefs, and I can speak on behalf of my fellow chiefs with complete confidence, believe to be true. There are 3 parts to the concept of fighting power. There is the physical component. What's the kit you've got? Who are you? There's a conceptual component. How are we going to go about our business? What are the tactics and strategies we're going to employ? And most important, there is the moral component. Do we believe in what we are being asked to do, and do we believe in each other? Never has that been more so clearly demonstrated than what we are seeing in Ukraine today, where the moral component of fighting spirit is proving to be such a determinant. But it is apparent in every single day, in every single unit around the world of your armed forces, of His Majesty's armed forces. And the chaplaincy is fundamental to our ability to have it, to own it, and to be confident in it. So can I echo to all of the chaplains here gathered and to all of your colleagues my personal thanks for the role that you play in making us the armed forces we are today. It's done with enormous compassion, it's done with wisdom, it's done with insight. In my service in particular, the BIS wears no rank. And that's so that they can adapt the rank of the person they're talking to and speak as an equal. That provides a line of communication that is not available in any other part of the chain of command. So for sailors, for Marines, for members of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary and the wonderful civil servants who support us, they have a confidant. They have a counsellor should that be needed. Scott has laid that out so well. But we also have in them members of the ship's company who can just check in. And they can check in at every stage. I have been privileged to command 4 ships. And in each of them, at some point or another, the chaplain has knocked on my door and said, "Are you all right?" And on one occasion, sat down in the seat opposite me, and I said, "I'm fine, Bish, thanks very much." And he just sat there. And sat there. And sat there. I grew up in a vicarage. I've learnt how to just hold my tongue and not be rude to priests. But boy, was I struggling. And when I finally looked up and I said, "Is there anything on your mind that you'd like to talk about?" He said, "Ben, are you all right?" And at that point, I realized I wasn't. And I needed some help. Because we were the far side of the world. We'd been away for many months. I was 34 years old, and I was feeling the weight of the responsibility of returning all of those people in my ship's company home quite keenly at that moment in time. So I was very grateful for that. There was a slight moment of joyful revenge. It shouldn't have been revenge, but it really felt like it. Because when we were back in warmer climes, there was a visit of the, we came across some yachts, and there was a request for some support that we were very happy to do. This was in the kind of middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and the seaboat went across. And the chaplain, who shall remain nameless, said, "Can I go across too? You know, I've enjoyed a bit of yachting. I'd like to see how they're getting across." I said, "Off you go." And he came back, and for reasons that are best lost in the midst of time, as the seaboat was coming back into the ship to be picked up on the line and then hoisted back on board, he fell out of the seaboat. As the bedraggled chaplain arrived back over the side, clearly all right, I was sufficiently bothered about that. I looked at him and he said, "Before you ask, there's only one of us who can walk on water, and it's not me." One of the things that has been afforded to by a member of the Assembly and pointed to is our families. They are crucial to us being able to do what we can do. And I am struck, as I do today, increasingly, that in this world when they can know so much more about what we are doing when we are deployed, that is actually bringing pressure into their lives. Not just because they can hear the ebb and flow of what the service personnel's daily routines are when deployed, but also because the service personnel is often so much more aware of what is going through. When my wife and I were courting and I was at sea, it was at best a weekly letter from me back to UK. Now it's instant WhatsApp and email. Unless, of course, you're serving in submarines. Not far west from here is our submarine base. We have been thinking about the pressure on those families supporting people who are deploying for ever longer patrols to ever further parts of the world. And I cannot personally think of a group on the planet that is more socially isolated from the people they love than the submariners who serve our nation and their families. So as you as a church think about supporting the groups, particularly here in Scotland, where the submarine service is such a profound part of the Royal Navy's presence, can I particularly ask you to keep an eye out for those whose partners, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers head to sea as submariners, because the pressure on them at the moment, in a world that expects instant connectivity, is enormous. We as a Navy are deployed in both polar regions. In the last 18 months, we have crossed in various ships every line of longitude around the world. We have a presence in 5 major oceans at any one time. We are very proud of the obligation that we maintain the nation's independent nuclear deterrent. Difficult topic though that may be to discuss, we believe it makes us safer. Alongside our Army and our Air Force colleagues, we continue to invest of ourselves with your support around the world in the pursuit of our mission. Granted to us through our Commander-in-Chief, that moral component, our purpose, our belief in ourselves and what we do matters so much, and I am very grateful for the church here, for the support that you give, either through your sending chaplains, through your prayers, through the engagement in the community with service families. There are a number of prayers that one could quote, the best of which are always written the eve of battle. Even then, many people who don't profess a faith seem to hope that there is a God. But the one I want to close with is not Nelson's from before the Battle of Trafalgar, because we do have other admirals and we have fought other battles in our history. The one I want to look to is that of Drake. O Lord, when thou givest to thy servants to endeavour in any great matter, grant us also to know that it is not the beginning, but the continuing of the same until it be thoroughly finished, that yieldeth the true glory. To the chaplaincy, thank you for recognising your work is never done. To the church for your support, we are most grateful. Moderator.
Thank you, Admiral. My father-in-law was a wireless operator and air gunner in the RAF during World War II. He was the only one to survive from his intake. He was 84 when he died, but he did not start talking about the war until the very end of his life. The trauma was buried deep, and he was a lover of peace. Every Remembrance Day, he stood as straight as he could with his medals on his lapels, and he remembered them. He also toasted to absent friends every Hogmanay, and I didn't realize what he was saying until he told me. You are the people who stand with other people in extremis. You don't answer their unanswerable questions, but you stay with them in them. And you tell them over and over and over again that they are loved. Thank you. Thank you. I believe that every time we take up arms, we collectively fail each other. And the most humbling thing I have learned is that those who make that excruciating choice do not disagree. The profoundly important job you do will not be forgotten by this church. We hold you in our prayers. We offer you steadfast friendship, and we keep your place while you go to places we could never imagine. The world today is a tapestry of broken and beautiful. I know we work together to bring peace and healing and love-inspired justice to this global neighborhood we are all a part of. For the part you play and the compassion you embody, the Church of Scotland thanks you. The General Assembly thanks you. I would ask that we all stand and say thank you.